Okay, I'll just go ahead and start today's class by just welcoming everyone. Sawadee Kap, nice to see all of you guys. Welcome to anyone who's at Tung, those of you guys joining us on Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom, and also anybody who's watching this on the replay as well. I'd like to welcome all of you guys. Today's class is all about chapter 23 of our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This chapter is titled Reminders Through Imagery, Symbolism of the Teachings. This is where you can learn about the symbolism of the teachings in terms of what you see when you go into temples, when you see artwork and you see different things like this. I'm going to walk you through helping you guys to see some of the symbolism that you're going to notice when you're walking through temples, when you're looking at artwork, when you're looking at architecture. So rather than just going into a temple and being, wow, that's a beautiful thing, instead you're going to know and understand the symbolism behind it and helping to remind you about the teachings of the Buddha. So I'd like to welcome all of you guys, whether you're joining for the first time or you've been joining regularly. The way that we start our class is we start with some meditation. So I'd like to invite all of you guys to join for meditation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with some chanting to ease us down into meditation. And then from there, I'm going to provide some guidance. And then after that, we'll just be meditating together. All of us online, everyone at the temple, will just all be meditating together. And then we'll come out of the meditation with some more chanting. And that's where I'll start the class today. If you'd like to join in the chanting, at the temple, you guys have laminated sheets over on the table. You guys are welcome to get those and join along in the chanting. There's Pali chants that the Buddha did during his lifetime in order to help the students to be able to remember his teachings. Today, we don't need to chant in order to remember the teachings, but we still chant in order to ease the mind into meditation and actually get more benefit out of the meditation itself. This helps you to set up mindfulness or awareness of mind, helps you to build concentration and ease the mind into meditation. And then after the chanting, that's where I'll come in with some guidance to be able to guide you in the meditation. There'll be a period of time where it's just quiet, as I mentioned, and then we'll come out of the meditation with some chanting. In terms of your body positioning, oftentimes people are learning in the seated position. There's seated, lying, standing, and walking positions. These are the 4 positions that you can use during meditation. The common place to start meditating is in the seated position. So people are usually sitting on the floor or sitting in a chair. If you're sitting on the floor, you might just sit with some cushions under your rear. This helps to lessen the angle at the hips, the knees, and the ankles. Some people even like to put the legs off the mat, having their legs just lightly crossed. If you have your legs crossed too tightly, this will impede the circulation. So having your legs just lightly crossed will help you to be able to allow the legs to have circulation and there won't be any pain in the lower legs. If at any time you feel any pain, just adjust the body. This will help to make the body more comfortable. Then with your hands and arms, the Buddha put his right hand over his left with his thumbs together, and he put this into his lap. If you'd like to do that, you're more than welcome to do that. There's other options here, though, as well. Some people like to put their palms on their thighs, on their knees, on their palms up. Some people rest their hands comfortably in their lap. There isn't just one fixed way to actually meditate with your body, so you find whatever's comfortable for you, and these are all options. For those of you guys that might be in chairs or a sofa or wheelchair on a bench or something like this, people sometimes like to put their feet flat on the floor or lightly cross at the ankles. These are all options as well. And then your hands and arms, put those wherever you feel comfortable. Having the upper body erect keeps the mind attentive and alert during the meditation, where if you were slouched, the mind would have a tendency to be dull or lethargic. But if you were real rigid, the mind could be overactive or uptight. So by having the upper body in the middle, this keeps the mind attentive and alert during the meditation. And this will also help you to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose, because with your sternum up and your shoulders back, it'll make it more comfortable for you to be able to breathe and keep the mind attentive and alert during the meditation. So I'm going to ease us into meditation with some chanting. If you'd like to join along in that chanting, you're more than welcome. And then I'll be back with some guidance to help you. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanang Abhivateyami Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakato Rokavito Anutero Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatawa Manusanam Bhoto Bhagavati. Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, in the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you'd like to just establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Once the breath is well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหะเขวาโหตังมหะเขวันนังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหะเขวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหะเขวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารนังสัมมุโนสคาโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรภูริสาดัมมาสติสตาตาวามนุสนังโพโตภาควาติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation, once again, welcome to all of you guys. Welcome to everyone at the temple. Welcome to everyone who's joining us online as well. Today is our group learning program, and we're in chapter 23 of our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This is the first volume of a 13-volume book series that's guiding you in developing a foundation in the path to enlightenment. By developing a foundation in the path to enlightenment, you can learn all the teachings that the Buddha taught that's going to lead you to this enlightened mental state, where the mind can be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. The mind will be experiencing focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory. Your personal, professional relationships will really blossom. They'll be at ease. You'll notice that you're not even in a bad mood anymore. You're not being bitter and harsh and hostile to individuals any longer. You're not gossiping or slandering. When you have problems and challenges, you're able to talk those out with people rather than just kind of festering on your own, that you know how to reach out to people and talk to them and solve the challenges that it is that you're experiencing. So when you're in the enlightened mental state, you'll notice that you have deep wisdom to be able to handle everything and anything around you, and your mind won't be shaken up, unsteady, and uncalm any longer. So again, I'd like to welcome all of you to our class today, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. Today's class is after having taught for almost 7 months now in this group learning program and sharing the foundational teachings that it takes to be able to get to enlightenment. Here towards the end of the book, there's a chapter about symbolism of the teachings, reminders through imagery, helping you to be able to understand some of the symbols that you'll see in artwork, in the architecture. When you travel around to various temples throughout the world, you're going to see certain symbols that are used in temples and artwork and these various things. And the reason why is because during the lifetime of the Buddha, everything he taught was oral. They didn't write anything down. It wasn't until after his death that they actually started writing things down. The language that he spoke and that he taught in, it was just an oral language. It didn't even have a script because the technology to write things down didn't exist in that region of the world. So he just spoke orally. But he used symbols in order to help remind students of his teachings. So I'm going to introduce you to some of those symbols today, some of the very common ones, and I'm going to explain to you why they're used and how they're used and what they can remind you of when you see them in artwork in temples and things like this. Because if you've been studying the teachings of the Buddha, you can go into some of these temples and you can see the symbolism, and it almost is like the temple walls speak to you. Because as you're looking around, you'll see these different symbols in different places. And these temples, a lot of them were created about 500 to 1,000 years ago. So as you're viewing the temples, you can actually see what the artists were talking about or what they were trying to communicate through their artwork. And this class is actually really quite fun because by the time we get to this point in our group learning program, students have learned a tremendous amount of information to be able to build up their practice. But now we just get to have a little bit of fun looking at some pictures. You guys can ask any and all questions that you like, whether it's related to the artwork or anything else that you'd like to ask questions about related to the teachings of the Buddha. And I'm going to walk you guys through this. For those of you guys that are in Wat Tung Yu, you guys can ask questions by just raising your hand on the computer. I think Helena or Doche or maybe Steve is up there to be able to click the button to electronically raise your hand so I can see that. And then those of you guys at the temple, there's microphones around that if you press the gray button, there's lights that come on and you can just hold that up to your chin, waiting a second or two, and we'll be able to hear you throughout the live stream, and you'll be able to hear each other at the temple too. And then for those of you guys that are in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you guys can ask questions by putting that into the comment section, and then I'll be able to see that and answer any questions that you have. And those of you in Zoom, you have the added functionality of being able to electronically raise your hand and ask any and all questions that you like through unmuting your mic. I'll be able to hear you here, and we'll be able to hear you throughout the live stream as well. For those of you guys that are curious, I've been traveling for about a week and a half now, and I've got another week and a half left to travel. I'm here in Mexico. I'm usually based in Chiang Mai, and I teach at the temple there at Wat Tung Yu. But when I travel like this, it's really nice that there's some students that have been willing to set up the computer so that I can go ahead and zoom in and still have classes and help the people who choose to come to the temple, and then those of you guys that choose to log in through the live stream as well. So I'm going to share with you guys these symbols to be able to help you guys to understand them. And as I mentioned, you guys are welcome to ask any and all questions as we go. So this first symbol is what some people refer to as the Na, and there's other ways to refer to it as well. What this represents is it represents your journey to enlightenment, and it represents enlightenment itself. And the one in the middle is the most common one, this one here. This one is very, very common. And then I've grabbed some others as well because artists will oftentimes represent things in different ways. And because of the universal truth of impermanence, you'll hear people use different names and depict these in different ways. But I can explain this more common one to you so that you'll understand what's being depicted here. Well, essentially, this image is starting right here where my pointer is of the mouse in the center. And what this is representing is how we're all in the cycle of rebirth. When we're born into the world, we're coming into the cycle of rebirth, and we're going around and around and around and around in the cycle of rebirth. And you can see how this line is really broad and really dark. And that's because we lack wisdom. We're essentially in the darkness. We don't have the wisdom of what it takes to be able to train our mind. And now, as we go around and around and around, being reborn countless times through the hell realm, the animal realm, the afflicted spirit realm, the human realm, and the heavenly realm, we eventually start getting onto the path to enlightenment. And you can see that the path kind of starts to narrow because we start gaining this wisdom and we start honing in on what it is that it takes to be able to get to enlightenment. But as we're making these steps forward and we're walking forward, notice how there's these step backwards. These are very common, that as you're making forward progress like this and things are going pretty well with your practice, you can have backward steps. And now, as you make those backward steps, it's important to learn and gain wisdom, ask questions, seek guidance from your teacher, and now start walking forward again. And now as you're walking forward, now you're going to have some more back steps. You're going to be walking backwards in some cases because you're going to kind of regress and backslide. But now you'd like to make some forward steps forward, and now continuing to cultivate wisdom, you're once again going to experience this missteps. But notice as you're going up this path how it's narrowing. It's narrowing in more and more and more. Even though you're having these back steps and you're having these missteps, you're still narrowing in on the path until eventually, as you come around here, you eventually get really close to the enlightenment, and now you make your way to enlightenment itself. So whenever you see this symbol, it's depicting your journey to enlightenment, and it's reminding you that it's not a linear progression. You don't just start at one place and then make completely forward progress. Oftentimes, that's the expectation that students put on themselves. But instead, there's going to be these back steps. And that's where it's important that you have trust and confidence in a teacher, and you reach out to that person and you explain the things that you're experiencing so that they can help you. But then over time, as you're gaining wisdom, you're narrowing in more and more and more and more as you're noticing that you're implementing the teachings. Because nothing on the path to enlightenment is based in belief. You're not believing a bunch of teachings and hoping something good happens when you die. You're learning teachings, you're investigating them and examining them, you're reflecting on them to independently verify them, and then you're practicing them, integrating them into your life and training your mind and uprooting certain pollutions that the Buddha discovered in the mind. And as you're doing this, you'll see that the condition of your mind is gradually improving, as well as the condition of your life. Because if you have hostility and bitterness, if you have hard times in relationships, if you don't know how to have harmonious relationships with others, you can be learning how to do this through cultivation of wisdom. And as you cultivate that wisdom, you'll see that the condition of the mind in your life is gradually improving. But each student has to choose to do that work, and realizing that there's going to be these back steps. These are very normal as part of someone's progression to enlightenment. And then ultimately the mind reaches enlightenment. You might see this symbol in artwork. There's certain fans that ordained practitioners will sometimes carry or use during certain events, and you might see it on those. You might see it on statues of the Buddha where they put it at the third eye, right in the middle of the forehead, in between the eyebrows. You can see this in lots of different places, and it's helping you to remember about enlightenment itself, that this is attainable, this is something that you can attain in this life, and it's helping you to remember that your journey isn't going to be linear, that it's going to have these missteps and these backward steps. Now, what we have on these other sides is, as I mentioned, these are different variations that artists take, because as we know, artists are very creative, and they will oftentimes come up with different variations of these things. But you can understand what I just shared about this common one, and you can relate it to these over here too. That is showing essentially that same thing, that forward progression with the back steps, but then you're narrowing in closer and closer and closer to enlightenment itself. So do you guys have any questions on this symbol? Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any and all questions that you like. For those of you guys at the temple, if you could just raise your hand there and then unmute your mics, then I'll be able to hear you. Okay, let's see if we have any questions anywhere. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do is move on to the next symbol. This is referred to oftentimes as a Dhamma wheel. The word Dhamma means teachings. That's a Pali word. But to translate this as teachings wheel, it doesn't really sound actually, appropriate. So I still use the term Dhamma wheel. I don't use that word Dhamma very much, but I use it in reference to this because it just sounds right the way that we kind of refer to it. This Dhamma wheel has a lot of symbolism in it, and this is a common symbol that you'll see a lot of different places in Buddhist culture, in artwork, in temples, and things like this. If you notice, what you've got here is you've got this big circle. This is the one that you can see the best, so I'll use this one here. You've got this big circle, and then you've got 8 individual spokes almost going around like a clock. Well, what this is meant to do is it's meant to remind you of the cycle of rebirth, and that you're stuck in this continuous cycle of rebirth, being reborn over and over and over and over and over again. And the way to get out of that is the Eightfold Path. That's why there's 8 spokes here. The Eightfold Path is the core central teaching of the Buddha that's going to explain to you how to escape out of this cycle of rebirth and get to liberation, where the mind is peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, where you no longer experience any discontent feelings. There's no longer any anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. Even the slightest displeasure is eliminated from the enlightened mind. As I mentioned, you won't even be in a bad mood anymore. You'll have deep wisdom. You'll be able to handle anything and everything that's being experienced. And on your way to enlightenment, you're cultivating that wisdom to be able to face any particular challenges that you have. Each one of these spokes represents a step on the Eightfold Path, with the 12 o'clock position representing right view. That is very key on your journey to enlightenment, is to understand and establish right view. This is the very first teaching of the Buddha, called the Four Noble Truths. And I've taught that in this program and many other programs many times. So this is something that you would need to know just to get on the path to enlightenment. Then we've got right intention. We've got right speech at 3 o'clock. We've got right action. We've got right livelihood at 6 o'clock. Then we've got right effort. We've got right mindfulness at 9 o'clock. And then we've got right concentration. These are the 8 steps, or the 8 factors that you would dial into your life closer and closer. If you can think about a speaker system and you've got 8 dials, you would tweak these 8 dials of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Mindfulness and right concentration. You would dial these in very closely, so that now as you tweak those and you're practicing them closer and closer, it's going to help the mind perform more and more optimally, so that you can eliminate the pollutions of the mind. This Dhamma wheel has symbolism, as I just described, reminding you of the cycle of rebirth, and the escape from that is the Eightfold Path. But then also, if you see behind me here, I'm standing here with a student at a local temple in Chiang Mai. If you see behind me, there's a Buddha image with a Dhamma wheel behind it. This is common that people will place a Dhamma wheel behind the head of a Buddha, because it's said that when a Buddha enters into the world, this is the best, most profound time to be able to actually get to enlightenment, because a Buddha has deep, profound wisdom about the path to enlightenment. And it's said that this wheel is actually on their head, not physically, but it's there figuratively. Where the top of the skull and the back of the skull come together, there's a little flat spot there. And a Buddha will reach up with their right hand and they will turn this Dhamma wheel counterclockwise upon their awakening to enlightenment. And this is a figurative thing, that when a Buddha turns this Dhamma wheel, it's like humanity taking a step forward. It's like we're entering into a new civilization or a new era. Because now with a Buddha in the world, the wisdom is going to be very deep and very profound for all individuals to be able to learn and practice, train their mind, and be able to get to enlightenment. So this is often placed in artwork or in temples behind the head of a Buddha. If you look at Wat Tung Yu over on the main temple, over at the main sala, the main building, the main hall, there's a very large Buddha statue, and behind the head of that Buddha statue is a Dhamma wheel. And you might see this in other places as well. Like here, this is Wat Umong that I'm standing at talking to this particular student. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular symbol, which is referred to as the Dhamma wheel. Okay, I see Rachel's got a question here. She's asking in Zoom, in many temples in Chiang Mai, there are panels with images of the Buddha's previous lives. Did the Buddha teach about his past lives, or were these stories culturally imposed later? He actually did teach about his past lives. He shared at different times in his teachings some of the past lives that he had, and he was able to recall those. That's one of the things that a Buddha is able to do. But there's other people that are maybe on their way to enlightenment or actually enlightened themselves that can also recall their past lives. It's not just a Buddha that's going to be able to recall their past lives. So a Buddha does understand their past lives, and that's how they've been able to get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides, that they've accumulated wisdom over multiple lifetimes, and that's all come together in their last life to be able to train their mind to be able to get to enlightenment. These are the three criteria that make a Buddha, is that they get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people, and countless people get to enlightenment during that person's lifetime. And then they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people will get to enlightenment after that person's death. So a Buddha, having observed their past lives, would be able to know about the cycle of rebirth, know about the stages of enlightenment, know about many things related to the cycle of rebirth and how beings move in and out of that. In their own life too, in that last life, they would have culminated and cultivated wisdom over multiple lifetimes to be able to bring it together and actually get to enlightenment in their last life without the help of any teachers or any guides. We've got some more here from Rachel. In temples, there are references to the Buddhist cosmology. Did the Buddha discuss this in his teachings? Yes, he did. But the thing is a lot of the temples have a lot of folk tradition embedded in the artwork. It's kind of like Thai folk tradition, kind of infused with Buddhist teachings. And this is why I teach with the original words of the Buddha. In the book series that I share, volume 11 has the most content about the cosmology that existed during the lifetime of the Buddha. He talks about all the 5 realms. He talks about what you experience in those realms. He talks about how you move in and out of those realms, and a lot of details like this. So by the time you make your way through the book series, you'll be able to learn all those different things. But it's really not something that you need to absolutely learn in the level of detail that the Buddha taught it in order to get to enlightenment. There's a certain cosmology that existed during the lifetime of the Buddha, but it's very detailed and very specific, and people would have known a certain amount of this from living during that lifetime. Nowadays, there's a much more kind of simplified or common understanding of this cosmology that can help you as you're making your way to enlightenment. So there's things that I teach that help you to understand a cosmology that you need, which is essentially the 5 realms, what is experienced in those realms, how you move in and out of those realms, what you experience as you're moving through the stages of enlightenment, the cycle of rebirth, and things like this. But a lot of the level of detail that the Buddha taught isn't actually required in order to get to enlightenment, that you can still eliminate the discontentedness of the mind without understanding the detailed cosmology that existed during the lifetime of the Buddha. Okay, let me check to see if we have any other questions coming in anywhere. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So I'm going to move on to the next one. This is actually a lotus flower, because lotus flowers are used all throughout Buddhist artwork because they symbolize your journey to enlightenment. So I'm going to explain to you what lotus flowers symbolize and how they grow, because we're going to be talking about a bloom lotus flower and a lotus flower that has a closed blossom that hasn't actually blossomed yet, but it's instead closed. Essentially, the way that a lotus flower is growing is it's got these roots that are deep down into the murky earth, and then it grows this strong stalk through the water. And the water is oftentimes very murky and muddy because it's growing in a pond. And then as it grows through that murky pond with its strong stalk, it rises up over the water, and then ultimately it will bloom into a beautiful lotus flower. And this is symbolizing your journey to enlightenment, because when an individual is still in the cycle of rebirth, their mind is holding on to the world. They're holding on to so many things, just like those roots are holding on to the earth down deep in the earth. But then you need to grow this strong practice, this strong stalk to be able to move through the murky water. And then as you're growing that strong stalk, essentially what you're doing there is you're developing your life practice. You're developing all the factors of the Eightfold Path to include meditation, but you need much more than meditation itself to be able to get to enlightenment. So that strong stalk, that's helping you to rise through that murky water. The murky water is symbolizing the world, that the world is full of murkiness. You're going to see killing and stealing and sexual misconduct and lying and intoxicants. You're going to see gossip and slander. You're going to see ego. You're going to see people being hateful and vindictive and talking bad about people behind their back and things like this. You're going to see so many things like this. And it's your choice of whether or not you indulge in those kinds of things or not. It's really unwise, because whenever you're doing those kinds of things, it's just causing harm to yourself, and that harm is going to come back to you. It's even causing harm to others in a lot of cases. So when you're causing harm to others, this harm is going to come back to you. So you need to make conscious choices through cultivating wisdom to rise above this murkiness of the world, where you're no longer participating in these, things like gossip and slander and lying and taking substances that cause heedlessness, sexual misconduct, and all these other things that go on in the world. And that's your strong practice in the wisdom that's helping you grow through that and rise above this murkiness of the world. And then when you rise above the murkiness of the world, you have the ability to bloom. And when that bloom comes out, that's like blooming into enlightenment. So oftentimes you'll see a bloomed lotus flower carved into the bottom of the statue of a Buddha, or if there's some artwork of a Buddha sitting somewhere, you might see that there's a bloomed lotus flower. He didn't literally sit on a big, large lotus flower, but instead they're just kind of using that symbolism to be able to symbolize enlightenment. That's what the bloomed lotus flower is symbolizing, is that a being is actually enlightened. Then when you see a closed lotus flower, like the one you see here in the image here at the top, when you see a closed lotus flower, what this is reminding you of is your potential to get to enlightenment. That not all lotus flowers bloom. Some of them bloom and some of them don't. But you have the potential. And it's really ideal in this human existence to be able to learn and practice and train your mind so that you can bloom. But that's choices that you need to make on your own. Nobody can give you enlightenment. Nobody can force you to attain enlightenment. It's through your own choices that lead you to the enlightened mental state. You need to be able to cultivate wisdom with guidance of a teacher and resources to be able to help you. But this closed lotus flower is symbolizing your potential to be able to get to enlightenment. So you oftentimes see closed lotus flowers in a lot of different places in Buddhist temples, whether it's artwork or up on the main area where they put a lot of the Buddha statues and things like this, they'll have closed lotus flowers there. So let me know if you guys have any questions here on this particular one, the lotus flowers. If you have those, you can put them into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and let me know, and then I'll be able to answer any questions that you have. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So this one here, what I've done is I've never actually seen this one at a temple anywhere. But what I did is when I was working on this chapter, I went out and just did a couple of searches to see what would come back, because I knew a lot of the symbolism, but there was some symbolism that I knew that would be out there that I'd never seen before. And if you know about some of the symbolism that I've already taught you, you can see other symbols that I don't teach you, and you can kind of figure out what they mean. So there's going to be lots of different symbols out there. I'm going to kind of teach you like 5 or 6 main ones, but you're also going to see some that I haven't taught you. So like this one right here, I haven't taught you what this means. It looks similar to some of the things we've already talked about, but I haven't taught you specifically what this means. So one of the fun parts about visiting a temple is it's kind of like a scavenger hunt where you can go around and look and see what the artists have put into the temple walls and the architecture and the artwork, and kind of figure out what is it that they're trying to communicate. Well, based on what I've already taught you, you can see this one here has that symbol of the Na, this bottom part here, which is a symbol of enlightenment. And then you can see here at the top of this, they've put a bloomed lotus flower, which is also a symbol of enlightenment. So we can easily look at something like this and we can see that it's representing enlightenment. So if I saw this somewhere, anywhere in any temple or any artwork or anything like that, I would know right away that the artist was trying to communicate and remind us about enlightenment itself. So you're going to see symbols that I haven't taught you about, but if you know some of the main symbols, you'll be able to see these things and you'll be able to kind of put together and piece together what you think the artist might have been trying to communicate. So it looks like Rachel has a question here. Let me just share that. She's saying, this is a question about Wat Tung Yu. Is there anything of interest, whether historically or culturally, about this temple? There is some things. I've done some research on Wat Tung Yu. It was actually commissioned by, I think it was King Rama the 5th or 6th or something like this. There was a certain king that originally commissioned this temple, if I remember correctly. But you can Google it and you can see all kinds of history about it. It was created about 500 to 700 years ago, the main building. The building that I teach in, it was developed in 1972. And at one time, it was the headquarters for all the monks in all of Chiang Mai, because each province, they'll have an organization for the monks that they would all come together and they would meet. So at one time, this building was essentially like the headquarters for all the ordained practitioners all over Chiang Mai, and they would come there for meetings and things like this. But now they don't use it for that. So the ordained practitioner who is the abbot of that temple offered it to me to be able to teach there. So now we're kind of stewards of this classroom to be able to take care of it and maintain the upkeep for us and our purposes and our use. But then also whatever we do and however we take care of it, it'll be available for future generations as well. Because if you look around that particular classroom, it looks like it probably hasn't been maintained for a good 50 years because it's been there for a little over 50 years. And now we're starting to initiate some projects that are going to help us to be able to maintain it and keep it nice for our purposes and then for the future generations as well. Okay, let me check to see if we have any more questions anywhere. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's move on to the next symbol. This next one is something that you'll see very commonly at many temples. You see this big image here at the base of the stairs. This here is from Wat Doi Satep. This is a famous temple in Chiang Mai that's up on the mountain, on Doi Satep Mountain. So you can see that here, and you can even see kind of a smaller one over here from one of their smaller buildings. But you'll oftentimes see these at many temples. Even Wat Tong Yu has these in front of their main sala. You can see these at many temples. They'll have this. In Thai, we call it Pinyana. This is essentially a Naga, or the king of the serpents. And I'll explain to you the story of this, but I'll just preface it with saying that I don't know that this story is true, but I don't know that it was untrue here because I wasn't there when this was occurring or potentially reportedly to have occurred. But I'll explain to you the story of this and why it's here at the base of the stairs. And then I'll help you to extrapolate the lessons of what it's going to help you to be able to understand about the path to enlightenment in your journey to enlightenment. So the story is that during the lifetime of the Buddha, that there was a serpent king, or a Naga, very large snake, that was very close to being reborn into the human realm, and it was able to transition itself to look like a human being. And it would transition itself to look like an ordained practitioner. And then it would go into where the Buddha was teaching all the ordained practitioners, and it would sit there and listen to the teachings looking like an ordained practitioner with a robe and shaved head and all these kinds of things. And as I was sitting there listening to the teachings, as was very common, the Buddha would teach for very long periods of time, people would get very tired and sleepy because learning the teachings is very hard for the mind. It's very challenging for the mind to understand these teachings. And oftentimes the mind wants to reject certain things that it's hearing, and it isn't willing to do the work to try to understand. So oftentimes when people's mind is working really hard to understand the teachings, they will tend to fall asleep. This was very common during the lifetime of the Buddha. Now, some people think that that's disrespectful to fall asleep, but it was quite common because the mind was working really hard. And an individual who has made their way to enlightenment in his teaching, like the Buddha was, he would understand that this is normal for somebody's mind to be working so hard, and that if they fell asleep, he wasn't angry, he wasn't upset. This was something that would occur during his classes, and sometimes lots of people were falling asleep during his discourses. And when they would fall asleep, he would just patiently wait. And then when everybody would start waking back up, he would just start teaching again. Well, as all these individuals were falling asleep, this snake that was looking like a monk fell asleep also. And when you're sleeping, you don't have full awareness of your consciousness as you do when you're awake. So when the snake fell asleep, it transitioned back to looking like a snake. It no longer looked like an ordained practitioner. So as the ordained practitioners were waking up, they could see that among them was this very large snake. And they were very fearful and they were very scared because they were unenlightened. An unenlightened being is going to have fear. And when they saw this snake that was among them, they went and got the Buddha, because an enlightened being isn't going to be scared of anything whatsoever. They have no fear in their mind whatsoever. The causes and conditions that produce fear have been eliminated. So when they went and got the Buddha, and the Buddha came and he saw this snake, slowly but surely the snake is waking up. And the Buddha asked the snake, why are you here? What are you doing? And the snake says, oh, I'm here to learn your teachings. I would like to get to enlightenment. And of course, the Buddha says, oh, you can't get to enlightenment because you're in the animal realm. Unfortunately, from the animal realm, you're not able to get to enlightenment. It's only in the human realm and the heavenly realm that these beings have the capability from that existence to be able to get to enlightenment. And the snake was like, yeah, I know, but I just want to get to enlightenment, or whatever he said. And then the Buddha finally asked him if he would be willing to leave, because he was trying to teach these human beings. And as long as they were confronted with the snake and this fear was rising up in their mind, they wouldn't be able to focus and concentrate on what it is that the Buddha had to share. So the Buddha said, you're very close to being reborn in the human realm, because obviously you can transition yourself to look like a human. So maybe in your next life, you'll be a human, and that's the time that you can learn my teachings. And the snake said, okay, if you won't let me stay here and learn your teachings, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to stand guard. And I'm going to stand guard that if anybody has ill will towards your teachings, I'm not going to let them pass by and come in and actually learn your teachings. Having ill will towards the teachings of the Buddha would be to have interest in changing his teachings. If somebody was actually changing the teachings of a Buddha, this would be for that person's harm and the harm of many countless people, because a Buddha figures out exactly what it takes to get to enlightenment. This is why they're able to get to enlightenment by themselves, because they have deep, profound wisdom of what it takes to get to enlightenment. And then they lay down those teachings for others. It's like laying down lights along the path and illuminating this path so many, many people can learn how to get to enlightenment. And when you start changing the teachings of the Buddha, it's like kicking over the lights, and other people can't know what it takes to be able to get to enlightenment. So having ill will towards the teachings of the Buddha would be to change his teachings. And that isn't something that anybody should be interested in doing. So this snake at the base of steps before you go into the temple is like it's standing guard. And it's reminding you of many different things. Again, I don't know that this story is true, and I don't know that it's false. I have never seen a snake that can transition itself to look like a human, but I also know that scientists share with us that 99% of the animals that once existed no longer exist in the world. The animals that we see are only 1% of those animals. So whether there was an animal at that time that could do this or not, I don't know. But nonetheless, there's certain lessons that you can extrapolate from this story that help you to understand certain aspects of the path to enlightenment. One of the first things that you can understand is that only humans and heavenly beings can actually get to enlightenment in those existences. Any beings in the hell realm, animal realm, or afflicted spirit realm, they're going to need to be reborn to be able to make their way to the human or heavenly realm, where they'll have the opportunity to then be able to get to enlightenment. This is the first thing. It can remind you, thank goodness that you're human. You have this ideal existence to be able to get to enlightenment. And it would be unwise to allow it to go to waste, because if it goes to waste, then who knows where you might be reborn in your future life. So if you dedicate time, effort, energy to be able to learn and grow and develop on the path to enlightenment, this is the ideal existence to be able to do that. This is the first thing that this can remind you of, is that thank goodness you're in the human realm. The second thing it can remind you of is that enlightened beings don't have any fear, that by the time you get to enlightenment, you've eliminated any and all fears. And I taught this back in chapter 17 of the book of how to eliminate your fears, because there's specific ways that you can train your mind to eliminate any and all fears that exist in the mind. So you can learn how to do this so that you no longer have to experience any kind of fear, because it's not fun to experience any fear. So enlightened beings don't have any fear. And then the third thing that this can remind you of is that whenever you come to learn the teachings of the Buddha, whether it's in the temple or whether it's reading a book or anything like this, is that you would like to be learning the original teachings of the Buddha based on his words, and then not be interested in changing his teachings. Because if you change a Buddha's teachings, it's going to harm you, and it's going to harm countless, because now you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment, and neither are anybody else who you share teachings with that is modifying and changing the teachings of a Buddha. So you're going to need to be able to approach the teachings of the Buddha as they are, and there are going to be challenges and struggles along the way where you don't understand certain aspects of his teachings. If you understood all of his teachings, you would already be enlightened. So whenever you're learning teachings in a class, it might take you 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different classes or combinations of discussions and reading before there's one particular teaching that you actually understand. This is what the Buddha describes as penetrating a teaching with wisdom, that you penetrate into the teaching and you don't just look at it on the surface and say, oh, I don't understand this and push it away, or oh, I don't like this and push it away, or oh, I disagree with this and push it away. Instead, penetrate into it. Ask lots of questions and learn it, reflect on it to independently verify it, and practice it so that you can see the truth for yourself. And that's what's going to lead to your enlightenment. If you were to just change the teachings of the Buddha, it's going to cause harm to you because you're not going to be able to experience this enlightened mental state where the mind is peaceful, calm, serenely content with joy, having eliminated all these discontent feelings. And anybody who you share that with, they're not going to be able to get to enlightenment either if they continue to hold on to those false teachings. So this is why this snake is standing at the base of the stairs, is to remind you of these things. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular image. It looks like Rachel has some questions here. Let me just look at those. Let's see, Rachel's asking, there's a creature that the Naga is coming out of. Some people have told me that this was the moment of the Naga's birth, but a professor at a university here said it represents his death. Do you know about why the Naga is coming out of a mouth, and what creature is this? I don't know, actually. I don't know why the Thais are representing it that way. And I imagine the more people you talk to, you're going to hear countless different stories and reasons why people say those things. In some situations, you'll see him depicted, this particular snake, as coming out of another being, and sometimes you'll just see it by itself. So it's being depicted in different ways because of impermanence. And also because of impermanence, many different people will give you different stories about this. But the one that I just shared with you, this is what you'll see in the Pali Canon. Even though I don't know that this story is true or false, and it sounds pretty mystical to me, and it sounds like it may not be true, it is in the Pali Canon. So that's why I actually share it with people, because it's there. But it doesn't talk about this other being that the snake is coming out of. So it's probably something that the Thai people, and maybe others, if it's represented this way in other countries, that they've added to their temples and their artwork along the way, because it only takes one or two or three people to start adding this. If you ever have been involved in any temple construction in Thailand, there's actually groups of people in Thailand that are craftspeople that specialize in the construction of temples. And whenever there's a new temple being built, essentially these craftspeople go around and they actually kind of build these temples from place to place to place. So if you've got, a group of people that are doing this, and maybe on one particular temple, they start changing the way that they're representing things, now it just becomes duplicated over and over and over again. And by the time you get to where we are today, you won't even necessarily know why people are doing it that way. And you'll hear countless different stories of why people say, what it is that is happening in any particular thing. The things that I'm sharing with you are fairly common across the Buddhist world, but some of these things aren't actually known that I'm sharing with you. But you'll see a lot of these symbols because they're very common symbols, but you'll sometimes hear different people explain them different ways because of impermanence. Okay, let me check Facebook and YouTube, see if we have anything coming in there. All right, I don't see anything coming in on Facebook or YouTube. All right, so let me share this last one with you. This is actually a leaf that symbolizes enlightenment. And the reason why is because when the Buddha was making his way to enlightenment, he spent time for 6 years working his way up to the mental state of enlightenment. And he knew that he had attained enlightenment after these 6 years from the age of 29 to 35 because his mind was peaceful and joyful. He didn't experience any more discontentedness. No matter what situation he was in, no matter what he encountered, he was always experiencing peace and joy. So as he knew that he had attained enlightenment, he knew that what he had discovered was very different than what other people were teaching. This is the unique nature of a Buddha, that by the time a Buddha comes into the world, what they're teaching is going to be very unique comparative to what other people are teaching at the time. During the lifetime of the Buddha, what people were teaching that led to enlightenment was causing harm to the physical body. So people would hang themselves upside down from trees. They would lay on beds of nails. They would starve themselves, eating, very minimal food where their ribs are protruding, their facial bones are protruding, had very little meat on their bones. They would, starve themselves and pierce their body with metal implements and all kinds of different things like this. And the thought was that if you could cause harm to the physical body and your mind could overcome that pain, that you would get to enlightenment. But this isn't actually true. And unfortunately, nowadays, there's even some people that still teach these kinds of things. Like if you've been taught while you're in meditation to just breathe through the pain, this is along those same lines, that this isn't actually what leads to enlightenment. And the Buddha knew that, but there were many people that were teaching in the world around him that were teaching those kinds of things. And all of his teaching focused on training of the mind and cultivating wisdom in the mind. So when he had discovered what it took to get to enlightenment and he knew that his mind was enlightened, he went to this particular tree. This picture that I'm showing you, this is in Northeast India. We refer to this in English as a Bodhi tree, but there's other names for this as well, depending on what language you're speaking and so forth and so on. He went to this Bodhi tree and he sat there for 7 weeks. And of course, he went and did other things too. Oftentimes, the myth is that the people think that the Buddha sat under this tree for 7 weeks and he meditated and he instantly got to enlightenment. But this isn't actually true. He had already gotten to enlightenment before he actually went to this tree. And now he just kind of contemplated at this tree about whether or not he should share his teachings with others, because he knew his teachings were radically different than other people. And he was contemplating of whether he should go back to the palace or whether he should go out into the world and share his teachings. And after 7 weeks, he came to an ultimate conclusion. And we know what that conclusion is that he decided to share his teachings. That's why we know them today, 2,500 years later after his death. But this tree that he contemplated at for 7 weeks is designated as the location that he attained enlightenment. Even though there isn't just one fixed location where he attained enlightenment, this is designated as that location. Because when he was getting ready to die, about 3 months before he was going to die, he informed his students that he was going to die, because he was that enlightened that he knew exactly when he was going to die. And he informed his students 3 months prior that he was going to die. And this was very wise on his part, because anybody that had attachment could work on letting that go over that 3-month period. So when he informed his students that he was going to be dying in 3 months, the students asked him, what are we going to do when you die? Because there's countless people that are coming to visit you day in and day out to show their respect and show their appreciation. What are we going to do when they show up and you're no longer here? And the Buddha described that there was 4 locations that we could visit in order to arise dedication and diligence in the mind, determination for your journey to enlightenment. And all these sites, actually most of them are in Northeast India, but there's one that is in Nepal, which is his birthplace. So one of those sites is this site right here. He described that if you would like to arise dedication towards the attainment of enlightenment, that you could visit the place that he was born, which you can go there and actually visit that place. You can visit the location where he attained enlightenment, and he attributed this tree to that location. Even though he attained enlightenment over a 6-year period, he designated this tree as the place that people could visit. He designated the location where he gave his first discourse, where he set in motion the teachings that lead to enlightenment. So the very first location that he taught, and he delivered his very first discourse on the Four Noble Truths. And then he designated the 4th location as the place where he died. And he said, these are the 4 places that you could visit: his birthplace, the place where is attributed to that he attained enlightenment, his location of his first discourse, and then the location that he actually died. And you can visit those places and many others too, associated with the life of the Buddha. Those places are still there and designated for people to be able to see them. So this particular tree that he contemplated at for 7 weeks, the leaf of this tree is in this particular shape. If you see the shape of the leaf, it's designating enlightenment. This is a symbol that we use in order to designate enlightenment, just like that symbol of the Na, just like the lotus flower. We use this one as well to signify enlightenment. And you can kind of see how there's this real thick leaf, but then it kind of goes off into this kind of like little hair right here almost, and it kind of goes off and kind of goes off like you're going off to enlightenment. And if you're interested in seeing this leaf and you're in Chiang Mai, the temple where I teach at Wat Tung Yu, there's a tree that has this exact same leaf. So you can actually see this particular leaf from an actual tree. If you're walking out of the temple and you're going out towards the main road and the main gate, right before you go out through the main gate, if you look over to the left, there's a big tree there. And if you look down on the ground, you're going to see a bunch of these leaves, unless somebody's recently swept them up or something like that. you'll see some of these leaves. You can even take one and preserve it if you like, but it's not going to help you get to enlightenment. But it's something interesting to be able to see, is that, this leaf is a symbol of enlightenment. So are there any questions here on this particular image of this particular tree and this leaf? Anything you guys would like to ask? You have to unmute yourself there, Helena.
Sure, thank you. So I still don't understand, Teacher David, why the Buddha wanted people to do that pilgrimage to those personal places from his life, because it seems highly probable that people will start worshiping him after something like that.
Mm-hmm. He didn't want people to visit these sites, but instead he was giving people a location that they could visit. If they were coming to see him and he wasn't going to be there, that he said, okay, if you would like to, you can go to these 4 places, and it will help you to arise dedication. Being in those places and kind of, traveling to those places, it can arise dedication for your journey to enlightenment. That's what the Buddha always focused a student's mind on, is your journey to enlightenment. There was actually a student during his lifetime that asked him how he could respect the Buddha. This was earlier during his lifetime. And the Buddha turned it around and said, the way that you can respect me is to learn and practice the teachings. That's the way to respect him. So the Buddha never focused the energy on him or the focus on him, but oftentimes the unenlightened mind is thinking this way. This is the challenge, is that when you hear some of these things that I'm sharing with you, as the unenlightened mind is hearing these things, it's focusing it through its own pollutions of mind and not thinking the way that an enlightened being would think, or the way that the Buddha would think. That the Buddha didn't want people to visit these sites, but instead he was giving this as a location that people could visit if they were coming. Because if someone maybe, say, had a craving to come visit him, not necessarily do they have to have a craving to come visit him, but if someone potentially had a craving to come visit him, one of the ways to eliminate that craving is to fulfill it. So potentially by going to visit these 4 places could help extinguish this craving and clinging, so that the mind can experience improved qualities by eliminating part of their clinging and their craving, by extinguishing it by visiting these places. So it's not something he wanted people to do, but he was giving them kind of an outlet for them to channel any particular desire that they might have to see him towards these 4 sites.
Okay, and I noticed that you said that the Buddha was that enlightened that he knew where he was going to die. So are there grades to enlightenment? Can one enlightened being be more enlightened than another?
The Buddha didn't know where he was going to die, but he knew when he was going to die. Once you get to enlightenment, your mind is enlightened, and everybody who's enlightened, they're going to experience the same thing, which is they're going to experience the elimination of discontentedness. They're going to experience focus, clarity, concentration, and deep memory. They're going to notice their personal and professional relationships are blossoming. They're not even going to be in a bad mood anymore. And there's other qualities like this that all enlightened beings are going to experience. But on your way to enlightenment, there's different attainments that some enlightened beings are going to ultimately experience and others won't, like the observation of past lives. Some enlightened beings will experience that and some won't. You can still get to enlightenment without observing your past lives. And then once you get to enlightenment, there's higher and higher degrees of clarity and concentration that you can acquire. So we don't rank people. We don't think of people as being in a hierarchy, but there are people who are maybe freshly have gotten to enlightenment, like in the last 3 months or 6 months. In their mind, while it's enlightened and they're no longer experiencing any discontentedness, it's not going to be as enlightened as somebody who's maybe been enlightened for 10 years. Because even though you get to enlightenment, you're still going to be meditating and you're still going to be training your mind to a certain degree. You wouldn't have to continue to train your mind. Your mind would reside in that permanent mental state. But if anything that you've done to be able to get to enlightenment, you would continue to do those things. And as you're continuing to do those things, the qualities of your mind will just enhance more and more and more and more and more. So there are higher degrees of enlightenment, but we don't classify it because it's just improved and enhanced qualities of what you're already experiencing as an enlightened being. And someone who's newly enlightened versus someone who's been enlightened for 10 or 15 or 20 years, their mind is going to be the same in that it doesn't have the pollutions and that it doesn't have discontentedness, but there's going to be certain wisdom and certain insight that someone who's been enlightened for a longer period of time would have versus someone who's just brand new to having attained enlightenment.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if there's any other questions anywhere. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do is just in class here, unless you guys have any other questions that you guys like to ask beyond just what we've been talking about here. If those of you at the temple or anyone online, if you guys have any questions whatsoever about the teachings of the Buddha, you're welcome to ask any and all questions that you like. This is just, like I mentioned, just kind of a fun class, a short class to be able to help you understand some of the symbolism. But sometimes students have other questions that they'd like to ask too about their journey to enlightenment. So let me just pause for a bit and see if there's anybody that has questions about anything and everything about the teachings of the Buddha or anything you're seeing related to Buddhism. You're welcome to ask any of those questions. Looks like Chris has a question here. Okay, Chris is asking, in the future, could there be enlightened beings who only teach part-time to pursue other complementary livelihoods at the same time? If so, what would that look like? So, Chris, I'm really not sure of any enlightened beings that are teaching other things or doing other things besides teaching. I haven't really encountered anybody that's doing that. There could potentially be that, but I'm just not sure. Never seen it myself. Let's see. Can you provide additional insight and advice about teaching while pursuing other livelihoods? Yeah, I don't know, Chris, because I haven't ever seen that for myself, and I'm not sure how that would look, or I haven't seen a model for that. Because oftentimes, in order to teach, you've got to get really fully involved in it, because it takes a lot of effort and energy to be able to guide people to enlightenment. You're guiding an entire community, and an enlightened being, their community is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow. There's going to be more and more people that are learning from that person. And you're going to eventually get to a point where, if you were doing these other things, it's like kind of like mixing and matching. And, either let's just say you started a business and you were an entrepreneur and you were trying to teach the teachings of the Buddha as well. Neither one of these things you're going to be able to do 100% and put your full effort and energy into. So they're both going to be kind of lagging. Whereas if you would just let go of being a teacher and really get into being an entrepreneur, you'll be really successful with that. Or if you let go of being an entrepreneur and just really get into teaching, then you'll be really successful at that. And someone might need to kind of navigate these two things for a while before they decide which direction they're going to walk. But by trying to do both of those things, it'll get very confusing for people. It'll kind of get muddled because you're not able to put your effort behind one particular thing or another and get fully involved in it and really build your Dhamma around that particular thing 100%. Okay, it looks like there's some questions at Wat Tung Yu, if you guys would like to go ahead.
Thank you, David. I notice in a lot of the Thai temples, there's a lot of murals on some of the walls. Are there any common stories that maybe you could just reference that maybe is common in the Thai temples besides the Naga story?
Sure. Most of the artwork that you're going to see on the inner walls of a main sala, it's all Thai folk tradition kind of blended in with Buddhism. And when I've gone around with people who say have a master's degree in Buddhism and who are Thai, even they don't know the actual stories because they're so embedded in folk traditions that are no longer even around, some of them nowadays. But there are some that you can look at, and that if you know the teachings of the Buddha, you can decipher. So like if you go to the main sala of Wat Tung Yu, since you guys are right there, if you guys walk into the main door and then you turn around and you look up behind you on the back wall, you'll see that there's 5 different artworks. And this is representing the 5 precepts. You can see that the first one on the left is representing killing, and then the next one is stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and substances that cause heedlessness. And it's pretty graphic because the artist is depicting that if you do these unwise things, the horrible things that would happen to you. And you got to keep in mind that this is an artistic representation. This isn't actually the teachings of the Buddha. The part that is the teachings of the Buddha is the 5 precepts. But of course, that's what you guys have learned in the programs and courses and retreats that I've shared, and I've taught it to you using the words of the Buddha. But an artist might take that and depict it any number of ways, because artists are excellent at eliciting emotion and showing things in a very graphic way and being very creative. So when you look at that in Wat Tung Yu in the main sala, you shouldn't think that the Buddha taught that these things were going to be occurring, because what you're going to see is, like, for example, the one with lying, you'll see that they're like pulling the person's tongue out and ripping it off and cutting it off. You'll see the one where the substances that cause heedlessness, they've got the person's mouth like cranked open and they're pouring this lava down the mouth of the person. It's really, really graphic. The one with sexual misconduct, there's a tree with spikes on it, and this woman is at the top climbing it all naked. And then there's a naked man like kind of chasing after her on this spiked tree. It's kind of comical if you look at it. It's not what the Buddha actually taught, but of course the 5 precepts are what he taught, but not depicting it in the nature that they're depicting it on those particular artworks. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. Let me just check Facebook and YouTube. All right. I don't see any.
Yeah, I would like to. Yeah, can I ask something more, please? Since
Sure.
you've opened up to the general questions.
Sure. Go ahead, Helena.
So I was wondering, what does it take when it comes to rebirth? What does it take for a being to be rebirthed in the animal realm if in the human realm there are so many, very difficult births? Like there are so many regions where there's war and famine. So what would it take for a person to be reborn into the animal realm?
There's multiple things, and you can look in volume 11 to be able to see this. And I forget what chapters, but you'll see it because there's subsections where the Buddha talks about the animal realm. But there's one thing that I can share with you that is common throughout the teachings of the Buddha, is he says that if you have wrong view, that you're going to either be reborn in hell or the animal realm. And you understand wrong view is that the mind doesn't understand the Four Noble Truths, that the mind doesn't understand that craving, desire, attachment is the cause of discontentedness. Essentially, the mind is blaming other people for the anger and the bitterness and the hostility within your own mind. You might think that other people are causing you to be angry. Other people are causing you to be frustrated or agitated. If an individual thought that way, by the time they get to death, the Buddha is describing that they would be reborn in hell or the animal realm because of their wrong view.
Okay. And in contrast, a being who is reborn into an extremely challenging human existence.
Same thing. Same thing. There's multiple things. Sometimes we like to say, okay, give me a list, right, of all these things. This isn't the way that Gotama works. It's not like there's an exact list, and if you do this one particular thing, then that's automatically going to have you reborn in a particular realm. It's a totality of what the condition of the mind is at death, that it's not like what we've often been taught in other traditions, where is if you do this one thing, you're doomed and you're automatically going to this place or that place. Remember, the teachings of the Buddha are for you to get to enlightenment in this life so that you're not experiencing any rebirth. So if there is rebirth, then it's going to be based on the condition of the mind at the time of death. But that's not what one's goal is. And that's not where you spend a large amount of your time focused on those kinds of studies. Instead, it would be wiser to focus on the Eightfold Path so you can train your mind and cultivate the mind, get rid of the pollution, and then experience enlightenment. But we have these teachings about the 5 realms because it's helpful to understand how the world is and how these things are happening. But I wouldn't suggest that anybody make that a priority in their practice until maybe you've been learning and practicing for maybe several years and you've got the Eightfold Path really well under your belt. You're noticing your discontentedness has significantly diminished. You understand the fetters really well. Maybe you've even eliminated the first 3 or maybe even more. And now that's a time where you've got all these other foundational teachings under your belt and you're practicing them really well. You may be in that first stage of enlightenment, and that's actually a good time to start really honing in on the cycle of rebirth if you'd really like to do it. You could obviously look at it before then, but there's so much work to be done to understand the Eightfold Path and all the other teachings that I encourage people to focus on those, because that's where you're going to see the real progress. studying about how beings get reborn into one particular realm or another, it's very challenging for you to be able to independently verify any of that stuff this early in your practice. So my suggestion would be to focus on the things that you can independently verify and the things that you can use in order to progress in your journey. Ultimately, you can independently verify all the teachings that the Buddha shares, but early in practice, it's hard to independently verify some of the things of the cycle of rebirth because the mind isn't quite awake enough to be able to do that. There's too much pollution in the mind. So if we put this cycle of rebirth and the realms of existence in front of the Eightfold Path and all these other teachings, then you're not able to do the work to really purify the mind and get to more awakening so that you can then have the insight and the wisdom and the ability to independently verify the things that you might be really interested in related to the realms of existence or the cycle of rebirth.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, I'm going to just check one more time. I don't see any questions anywhere. Let's see. Yeah, that was Chris's. Oh, this is a new question from Chris. Okay, one more from Chris here. Does an enlightened being still have an existence? The answer is they're still in existence. They're still alive in the human realm, but they've escaped out of the cycle of rebirth. So they're not going to experience a new existence, but they are still in the human realm and they're still a human being. I'm wondering if it is proper to consider an enlightened being as no longer having an existence, similar to flowers not having an existence, but a little different. I wouldn't really think about it that way. I would think of it as they're not going to experience a new existence in the cycle of rebirth because they've dismantled the cycle of rebirth, but they are still in existence. They are still in the human realm, or they could be in the heavenly realm, but what we focus on is the human realm mainly. So an enlightened being like the Buddha, he was still a human being. He was still walking around doing all the same things that we do, right? He's still eating, he's still sleeping, he's still urinating and defecating and all those kinds of things. So it's best to be able to look at an enlightened being as a human being, just like you and I, because if you think of them in any other way, oftentimes people put them on a pedestal and put them up so high, you think that maybe you can't attain that mental state. And it's important that you be able to maintain the understanding that this enlightened mental state is available for anybody and everybody who's willing to put in the work and has a sincere interest to learn and practice to be able to acquire this mental state. All right, so I'm just going to end class here by thanking all of you guys, whether you're online or you're at the temple. Thank you so much for joining for our class today and being interested in learning the teachings of the Buddha. If you would ever like to learn more, you're more than welcome to attend either at the temple or online, because I teach classes Sunday, Wednesday, and Saturday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. You're welcome to attend any of those classes. The ones at 9 a.m. are at the temple, and I live stream them as well. And then the 9 p.m. ones I do from home typically, and they're live streamed from there. So no matter where you are in the world, no matter what time zone, there should be a live class available for you. And where you can't get to a live class, they're recorded on YouTube, Facebook, and our podcast, so you can listen to the recording. I suggest for brand new students to start with first volume of our book series, volume 1. You can download it for free from our website. You can take that file and go print it. You can get printed versions there at the temple by just reimbursing us for our printing cost, or you can order them on Amazon and you'll be able to start from the beginning of the path to enlightenment, where you can gradually build up your practice little by little. So again, thank you all for joining, and perhaps I'll see you guys in a future class. Take care and be well. We'll see you next time. Sawadee Kap.
Thank you again for watching your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.